So I'm just going to go over the first lesson of Mendelian Genetics. I'm going to go through the PowerPoint and you'll be able to fill in the notes if you miss class or you miss something. So Gregor Mendel, he's considered the father of genetics. He was an Austrian monk who worked in a monastery garden, and this was between 1856 and 1863. He cultivated and tested thousands of pea plants. Now this is pretty interesting because around this time, the Civil War was actually happening here in America. So just kind of, putting a date around, just kind of cool to think about. So while working, he observed that the plant's offsprings retained the traits of the parents. So originally stated that these physical traits are inherited as particles, but we now know these particles are DNA and chromosomes. So distinctive qualities that make up an individual organism are known as characteristics. An allele or trait is a heritable variant of a characteristic. So characteristic, for example, for people would be hair thickness. So, and then the trait or allele of that characteristic would either be thick hair or thin hair. This expressed physical trait is known as an organism's phenotype. So thick hair would be one phenotype, thin hair would be another phenotype. These green pods for these uh, peas, that would be a phenotype. The green leaves would be a phenotype. Or a flower color would also be a phenotype. So Mendel's experiment. So he looked at the different traits of pea plant characteristics. So like I mentioned before, so here's the characteristics he looked at: seed shape, seed color, flower color, pod shape, and pod color. Now most of his work was done over here with the flower color. And then you can see the different traits. So yellow's a trait or allele, and green's a trait or allele. They're two different ones. So he did this. He found true breeding parents of purple flower peas and white flower peas. So true breeding parents are organisms that always pass down the same phenotypic trait. So you got to be careful with this one because it's talking not only about it's just talking about that parent, no matter what organism it breeds with, no matter what phenotypic trait that other organism has, it always will produce the same trait. So an example would be purple flower pea plants always produce purple flower pea plants, and white flower pea plants that always produce white flower pea plants. So the next step was he crossed two different true breeding plants. So he crossed the purple true breeding plant and then the white true breeding plant. This mixed the genes from both parents, which caused him to get a hybrid offspring. These offspring were all purple. So when he crossed these two offspring, he got the F1 generation. So the parental generation would be the first two individuals that are crossed to determine or predict genotypes. So in his case, it was the true purple and the true white. The F1 generation were those offspring, right? So the first generation, and then the purple, these three purple and this white were the F2 generation, and the result of a cross between two F1 individuals. So Mendel was confused how the white color traits disappeared in the F1 generation and reappeared in the F2 generation. So if you go back to this chart here, you can tell that these ones were all purple, yet when you cross them both together, now there was a 3-to-1 ratio of purple to white. So for every three purples, there would be a white. So step 4 is he repeated the experiment with true breeding parents with other phenotypic traits. So I think I mentioned this before, but phenotypic and phenotype are interchangeable with each other. Phenotypic just runs smoother in a sentence. So he found the same thing, that all these different traits disappeared in the F1 generation, but then reappeared in the F2 generation in a 3-to-1 ratio. So Mendel's conclusion, each plant carried two sets of instructions for each characteristic, one from the mother and one from the father, and that the dominant trait will always be expressed. So that's what he concluded. But we now know these instructions are known as a genotype. So this is the letter combination of the genes or alleles present. This is the genetic constitution of an individual organism, and it's like their blueprint. Alternate version of a gene resulting in a different expressed phenotype is known as an allele. So it's important to know that genes have different variations of themselves. So one could code for purple flowers and one could code for white flowers. They're the same gene and they still code for the same trait, just one codes for purple and one codes for white. For each characteristic, an offspring inherits two different alleles, one from their mother and one from the father. So now we're going to go into dominant versus recessive alleles. So if the two alleles are different, it's considered heterozygous, and they'd be represented by a capital P or a lowercase p. If the two alleles are the same, it's considered homozygous, and that'd be a little p, or a big P, big P. If it's little p, it's homozygous recessive, and if it's big P, it's homozygous dominant. Dominant allele is expressed and is represented by a capital letter. So what this means is that the dominant allele is always expressed. So if there's one dominant one and one recessive, that dominant trait is going to be expressed. Recessive allele is not expressed and is represented by a lowercase letter. So the only way a recessive allele can be expressed is if it's homozygous recessive, which means it has two of these little p alleles. So example of a genotype would be just a small genotype would be big A, big S, little s, big C, big C. So this would be the genotype, right? So this is one gene, the two different alleles. This is one gene, two different alleles, right? And this would be same gene, and in this case, two of the same alleles. Now when I say the same gene, I mean the gene that codes for the same trait. If you think about chromosomes, right? Chromosomes came in pairs. Well, these genes are located on the chromosome, right? One gene that codes for the same trait on one chromosome, and then that same gene that codes for that same trait on the other chromosome. And depending on what allele that gene it has, it'll depend on the what that gene codes for. So what variation of that trait it codes for. So that's it for now. I'm going to post some more videos, go through a couple of the homework problems, and then post some of the future lessons. Thanks for your time. If you have any questions, make a comment, send an email, or ask me in class.